"I can defend him," said the poor 8-year-old girl after the lawyer abandoned the young millionaire in court. "Before anything else, let's see how connected we really are. What's one thing you can see from your window right now?" The gavel was about to fall when a small voice cut through the tense silence of the Manhattan courthouse like a blade through silk. "I can defend him!" Every head in courtroom 7 turned toward the source of that brave declaration. There, in the back row reserved for spectators, stood 8-year-old Emma Johnson. Her worn sneakers barely touched the floor. Her faded pink dress was 2 sizes too big, and her dark curls were held back with a rubber band that had seen better days. But her brown eyes burned with determination that would have made seasoned attorneys envious. Judge Harrison, a stern man in his 60s who had seen everything in his 30 years on the bench, removed his glasses and stared. "Young lady, this is not a place for games." Emma stepped into the aisle, her chin raised despite the trembling in her small hands. "I'm not playing, Your Honor. I know the law, and I know he's innocent." At the defendant's table, 28-year-old Michael Thompson looked up with exhausted surprise. The heir to Thompson Industries had been fighting fraud charges for 6 months, watching his life crumble as evidence seemed to pile against him. His own attorney, Richard Davis, had just announced his withdrawal from the case, claiming irreconcilable differences with the client's approach. But Emma had seen what others missed. She had watched Richard Davis whisper urgently into his phone during recess, had noticed how his eyes kept darting to the woman in the expensive navy suit sitting 3 rows behind the prosecution table. Victoria Sterling, Michael's fiancée of 2 years, sat perfectly composed, her manicured fingers clutched around a designer purse. "Your Honor," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I've been studying this case from the gallery for 3 weeks. I've read every document filed, heard every testimony. Mr. Thompson is being framed, and I can prove it." The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Linda Morrison, laughed dismissively. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We cannot allow a child to disrupt these proceedings." But Judge Harrison held up his hand. Something in the girl's earnest demeanor intrigued him. "What exactly are you claiming?" "Young lady," Emma's heart pounded, but she thought of her father's words before he died. "Emma, honey, sometimes the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth." Robert Johnson had been a paralegal before cancer took him 2 years ago, and he had filled Emma's young mind with legal knowledge most adults never acquired. "I'm claiming conspiracy, Your Honor. Mr. Davis didn't withdraw because of differences with his client. He withdrew because someone paid him to fail, someone who stands to gain everything if Michael Thompson goes to prison." Victoria Sterling's composed mask slipped for just a moment, her knuckles whitening around her purse handle. Michael leaned forward, hope flickering in his green eyes for the first time in months. "How could you possibly know?" "Because," Emma interrupted, pulling a small notebook from her dress pocket, "I've been taking notes, and lawyers aren't the only ones who can recognize when something doesn't add up." Judge Harrison studied the determined child before him. In all his years, he had never encountered such an unusual situation. "Young lady, what is your name?" "Emma Johnson, Your Honor. My daddy taught me that justice isn't about who has the most money or the fanciest suit. It's about truth." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters in the back row leaned forward, sensing a story that would make headlines. This wasn't just another corporate fraud case anymore. This was David versus Goliath, with David being an 8-year-old girl in a thrift store dress. "Your Honor," Richard Davis interjected, his voice strained, "surely we cannot entertain this fantasy. The child has no legal standing, no credentials." "But she has eyes," Emma shot back, "and she knows how to count. Mr. Davis, why did you receive 3 payments of $50,000 each in the past month? Payments that came from an offshore account registered to Sterling Enterprises?" The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria Sterling went pale, and Richard Davis looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Judge Harrison set down his gavel. Counselor Davis, I think you and I need to have a serious conversation. As for you, young lady, I believe this court needs to hear exactly what you've discovered." Emma nodded solemnly, knowing that in the next few minutes she would either save an innocent man or destroy his last chance. But as she looked at Michael Thompson's grateful eyes, she knew her father would be proud. Robert Johnson had always told her that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing what's right when you're terrified. Right now, facing a courtroom full of adults who thought she was foolish, Emma had never been more determined. The real battle was just now beginning. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly on the bench. "Young lady, these are very serious accusations. I hope you understand the gravity of what you're claiming." Emma's small fingers tightened around her notebook, but her voice remained steady. "I understand perfectly, Your Honor. My daddy always said that telling the truth is never wrong, even when it's scary." Victoria Sterling shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfectly manicured nails now digging into her palms. She caught Richard Davis's eye and made a subtle gesture toward the courtroom door, but the attorney was frozen in place, sweat beading on his forehead. "Proceed, Miss Johnson," Judge Harrison said, his tone gentler now. "Tell us what you've observed." Emma opened her worn notebook, pages filled with her careful handwriting in purple ink. "3 weeks ago, I started coming here because Mrs. Patterson from the community center said the courthouse had free air conditioning, and I could do my homework in the back. But then I heard Mr. Thompson's name, and I remembered it from the newspapers." She looked directly at Michael, whose green eyes were fixed on her with desperate hope. "The papers said he stole money from his own company, but that didn't make sense to me. Why would someone steal from themselves?" Prosecutor Morrison stood up. "Your Honor, this child's interpretations of complex financial—" "Let her finish," Judge Harrison commanded firmly. Emma continued, her confidence growing. "So I started listening, and I noticed things. Like how Mr. Davis never objected when the prosecutor said mean things about Mr. Thompson. Real lawyers object all the time. I learned that from watching TV with my daddy." A few chuckles rippled through the gallery, but Emma's expression remained serious. "Then I saw the bank statements they showed in court. The money that supposedly went to Mr. Thompson's personal account? It went to account number 847592018. But look here." Emma held up a crumpled piece of paper. "This is a receipt I found in the trash outside the courthouse last week. It's from Mr. Davis's lunch, and he wrote this same account number on the back with the initials VS. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Victoria Sterling's face had gone completely white. Richard Davis finally found his voice. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A child rummaging through garbage." "Mr. Davis," Judge Harrison's voice cut like ice, "I suggest you remain quiet unless you're prepared to explain this account number." Emma wasn't finished. She pulled out another piece of paper, this one neatly folded. "Yesterday, I heard Miss Sterling talking on her phone during recess. She said, and I wrote it down exactly, 'Richard, stick to the plan. Once Michael is convicted, I'll inherit everything through the engagement contract. Then we can disappear to the Cayman Islands like we discussed." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Michael Thompson stared at his fiancée in shock, his face a mixture of heartbreak and betrayal. "Victoria?" he whispered. "Is this true?" Victoria Sterling stood abruptly, her designer purse clutched against her chest. "This is ridiculous. A child's fantasies and coincidences." "Then you won't mind if we examine your phone records," Emma said quietly, "because I also wrote down the exact time of that call. Yesterday at 2:47 p.m. during the afternoon recess." Judge Harrison was already reaching for his gavel. "Bailiff, I want Ms. Sterling's phone secured immediately. Mr. Davis, you will surrender all financial records related to this case." But Victoria was already moving toward the exit, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. "I don't have to listen to this nonsense." "Miss Sterling, you will stop right there," Judge Harrison commanded. But Victoria was pushing through the crowd of stunned spectators. Emma suddenly gasped, pointing toward the defendant's table. "Mr. Thompson, look in your briefcase. The blue folder. Check the blue folder." Michael, still reeling from the revelations, mechanically opened his briefcase and pulled out a blue folder he'd never seen before. Inside were documents, forged signatures, fake transactions, all bearing his name. "I've never seen these before," he said, his voice hollow. "Because Miss Sterling planted them there," Emma exclaimed. "I saw her slip something into your briefcase when you went to the bathroom 20 minutes ago. She said she was getting you tissues for your allergies, but she put that folder in there instead." Security guards were now moving toward the exits, but Victoria had disappeared into the crowded hallway outside the courtroom. Judge Harrison pounded his gavel repeatedly. "This court is in recess. I want law enforcement to find Victoria Sterling immediately. Mr. Davis, you are hereby held in contempt, and I'm ordering a full investigation into your finances and communications." As the courtroom dissolved into chaos, Michael Thompson turned to Emma with tears in his eyes. Why did you? Emma climbed up onto the chair next to him, her small hand reaching out to pat his arm. "Because justice isn't about who's biggest or richest, Mr. Thompson. It's about what's right, and what they did to you wasn't right." But even as Michael smiled through his tears, Emma's sharp eyes caught something everyone else had missed. Richard Davis was texting furiously on his phone before the bailiff could confiscate it. Her blood ran cold as she realized Victoria Sterling's escape wasn't panic, it was planned, and Emma was now the only person who could prove it. Emma's heart pounded as she watched Richard Davis frantically typing on his phone before the bailiff snatched it away. In that split second, she caught a glimpse of his screen. "Package delivered. Proceed to Phase 2. "Judge Harrison!" Emma called out, jumping down from her chair. "Mr. Davis just sent a message about Phase 2. This isn't over." "Oh, Deem," but the courtroom was in chaos. Security guards were shouting into their radios, court personnel were rushing about, and the crowd of spectators was buzzing with excitement about the dramatic escape. No one heard her small voice except Michael Thompson. "What did you see, Emma?" Michael asked, crouching down to her eye level. "Mr. Davis texted someone about Phase 2, Emma whispered urgently. "I think Miss Sterling's escape was just the beginning. They're planning something else." Before Michael could respond, Prosecutor Morrison approached them, her sharp features softened with what might have been respect. "Miss Johnson, I owe you an apology. In 20 years of prosecution, I've never seen anything like this." Emma looked up at the tall woman. "Does this mean you believe Mr. Thompson is innocent now?" "It means we need to find Victoria Sterling and get to the bottom of this conspiracy," Morrison replied. "But first, we need to keep you safe. If what you're saying is true, you might be in danger." Emma's eyes widened. She hadn't thought about that. "But I'm just a kid. Why would they want to hurt me?" "Because, sweetheart," came a new voice from behind them, "you're the only witness to their entire plan." They turned to see Detective Sarah Chen, a petite Asian woman in her 40s, with kind but sharp eyes. She had been observing the proceedings from the back of the courtroom. "I'm Detective Chen, NYPD Financial Crimes Unit," she said, showing her badge. "I've been investigating suspicious activity around Thompson Industries for months, but we could never find solid evidence until today." Emma felt a surge of pride, but it was quickly replaced by worry. "Detective Chen, do you think Ms. Sterling will come back?" "People like Victoria Sterling don't just run, honey. They have backup plans, lots of them." Detective Chen knelt down to Emma's level. "Can you tell me everything you remember about what she said on that phone call?" Emma flipped through her notebook again. "She said to stick to the plan, that she'd inherit everything through something called an engagement contract, and then they could disappear to the Cayman Islands. But there was something else." Emma's brow furrowed as she concentrated. "She mentioned a number. She said the Thompson account transfer of 2.3 million should clear by Friday." "That's tomorrow," Michael gasped. 2.3 million. That's my personal inheritance account. Only I have access to that, and my father His face went ashen. "My father is in the hospital. He had a stroke 3 weeks ago." Detective Chen was already on her radio. We need to freeze all Thompson family accounts immediately and get me a unit to Presbyterian Hospital. I want protection on Michael Thompson's father." Emma tugged on Detective Chen's jacket. "There's more. Yesterday I heard Ms. Sterling talking to someone else, not Mr. Davis. She called them Uncle Frank and said the hospital paperwork was ready." A chill ran through the group. Michael grabbed Emma's shoulders gently. "Emma, what kind of hospital paperwork?" "Something about changing who gets the money if something happens to your dad." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "She said it would look like a natural progression after the stroke." Detective Chen's face hardened. "We need to get to that hospital, now." As they rushed out of the courtroom, Emma noticed something that made her blood freeze. In the hallway, she spotted a man in a hospital uniform reading a newspaper by the water fountain. When he saw their group, he quickly folded the paper and began walking in the same direction they were heading. "Detective Chen," Emma whispered, pointing discreetly. "That man in the hospital clothes. He's following us." Detective Chen glanced over casually, then immediately spoke into her radio in code. "We have a tail. Grey scrubs. 6'2", headed east on level 3. But when they turned the corner, the man had vanished. "He's gone," Michael said, looking around nervously. Emma shook her head, her young mind processing the patterns she'd learned to recognize. "He's not gone. He's getting ahead of us." She looked up at Detective Chen with frightened but determined eyes. "They know we figured it out. They're going to try to stop us from reaching the hospital." As if on cue, Detective Chen's radio crackled. "All units, be advised. Presbyterian Hospital just reported a power outage in their administrative wing. Security cameras are down." Top. Emma's notebook fell from her trembling hands as the terrible realization hit her. "They're not just stealing Mr. Thompson's money," she whispered. "They're going to hurt his daddy to make sure they get away with it." And somewhere in the maze of Manhattan's busy streets, Victoria Sterling was watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back at the little girl who had destroyed her perfect plan. The taxi ride to Presbyterian Hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of Emma's life. She sat squeezed between Michael and Detective Chen, watching the city blur past while her mind raced with terrible possibilities. "Detective Chen," Emma said quietly, "what if we're already too late?" "We won't be," Detective Chen replied firmly, but Emma could see the worry in her eyes. "My partner is already at the hospital making sure Mr. Thompson Sr. is safe." Michael stared out the window, his hands clenched into fists. "I should have seen it. 2 years I was with Victoria. And I never suspected." His voice cracked. "She was at the hospital every day after Dad's stroke. Said she wanted to help with the paperwork." Emma's notebook was open on her lap, and she was frantically writing down everything she could remember. "Mr. Thompson, did Ms. Sterling ever ask you to sign papers you didn't read?" Michael's face went pale. "Last week. She said they were get-well cards for Dad, but..." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his photos. "I took a picture of myself signing them because she said it would be sweet to show Dad later." He handed the phone to Detective Chen, who immediately forwarded the image to her team. "Good thinking, Michael. Emma, this is exactly the kind of evidence we need." The taxi pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, and Emma felt her stomach drop. Through the glass doors, she could see people in hospital uniforms moving with unusual urgency. "Something's wrong," Emma whispered. Detective Chen was already on her radio as they rushed through the automatic doors. "Chen here. What's the status on Thompson Sr.?" The voice that crackled back made Emma's blood freeze. "Detective, we have a problem. Mr. Thompson's medical chart shows that someone attempted to change his medication schedule 20 minutes ago. The nurse on duty stopped it just in time." They hurried to the elevators, but Emma suddenly grabbed Detective Chen's arm. "Wait! Look at the directory board!" Everyone turned to see what Emma was pointing at. The hospital directory showed that William Thompson was in room 847, the same number sequence as the bank account Emma had discovered in Davis's notes. "That's not a coincidence," Michael breathed. "No," Detective Chen agreed grimly. "They've been planning this for months, As the elevator doors opened on the 8th floor, Emma's sharp eyes immediately spotted something that didn't belong. At the nurse's station, a woman in scrubs was rapidly typing on a computer, but her fingernails were perfectly manicured, just like Victoria Sterling's. "There!" Emma pointed. "That's not a real nurse." The woman at the computer looked up at Emma's voice, and for one terrible moment, their eyes met. It was Victoria Sterling, wearing a blonde wig and hospital scrubs, her face twisted with rage at being discovered by the little girl who had ruined everything. Victoria grabbed something from the nurse's station and ran toward the stairwell. But not before Emma saw what she had taken, a syringe filled with clear liquid. "She's got medicine," Emma shouted. "She's going to hurt Mr. Thompson." Detective Chen was already calling for backup, but Victoria had a head start. Emma made a split-second decision that would haunt her for years to come. She broke away from the group and ran after Victoria, her small legs carrying her faster than any adult expected. "Emma, no!" Michael called after her, but she was already through the stairwell door. Emma's sneakers echoed against the concrete steps as she raced upward, following the sound of Victoria's heels above her. She could hear Victoria talking angrily on her phone. "The plan's blown. The kids saw everything. We need to finish this now and get out." By the time Emma reached the 10th floor, she was gasping for breath, but she could see Victoria just ahead, pushing through the door to the cardiac intensive care unit. Emma followed, her heart pounding not just from running, but from the terrifying realization of what Victoria intended to do. The CICU was dimly lit and eerily quiet. Emma crept forward, staying low behind the nurse's station. She could see Victoria approaching room 1047, where an elderly man lay sleeping peacefully, surrounded by beeping machines. Emma had never seen William Thompson before, but she knew immediately this was Michael's father. He looked so much like Michael. The same kind green eyes, now closed in medicated sleep. The same gentle features, now aged and softened by illness. Victoria stood over the bed, pulling the cap off the syringe with her teeth. "This is all your fault, old man," she hissed. "If you hadn't had that stupid stroke, I could have waited longer. But no, now I have to clean up this mess because of your interfering son and that annoying little brat." Emma knew she had seconds to act. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes, Emma, being brave means doing something even when you're terrified." She took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the nurse's station. "Stop!" Emma's young voice rang through the quiet unit. "Put that down!" Victoria spun around, her face contorted with fury. "You! This is all because of you." But Emma wasn't backing down. "I know what you're doing, and I won't let you hurt him. He's a good man, and his son loves him." Victoria's laugh was cold and bitter. "Love? Do you know what love gets you, little girl? Nothing. I spent 2 years pretending to love Michael Thompson, and for what? To watch him waste his family's fortune on charity and kindness." She raised the syringe. "Well, no more." Emma's hand was already reaching for the emergency call button on the wall, but Victoria was closer to William Thompson's IV line. It was a race against time, and Emma realized with growing horror that she might not win. Emma's hand slammed down on the emergency call button just as Victoria lunged toward William Thompson's IV line. Alarms began blaring throughout the cardiac unit, but Victoria was already inserting the syringe into the medication port. "Too late, little brat!" Victoria snarled, pressing down on the plunger. But Emma had one more trick up her sleeve, something she'd learned from watching her father work with medical equipment during his cancer treatments. She grabbed the IV tubing below the injection site and kinked it hard, stopping the flow of whatever poison Victoria had injected. "What did you—" Victoria started. But Emma was already shouting at the top of her lungs. "Help! Somebody help! She's trying to kill him!" The CIQ erupted into activity. Real nurses came running from every direction. Security guards poured through the doors, and Emma could hear Detective Chen's voice shouting orders from the stairwell. Victoria realized her plan had failed and made a desperate grab for Emma. "You've ruined everything! I'll make you pay for this!" But Emma was small and quick. She ducked under Victoria's reaching arms and ran toward the approaching security guards. "She poisoned his IV. I stopped the flow, but you need to flush the line." Dr. Martinez, the head of cardiology, took one look at the scene and immediately began barking orders. "Get me a new IV line, stat. Security, restrain that woman, and someone get this child to safety." Victoria fought like a wild animal as the security guards tried to handcuff her. "You don't understand. That old man is worth millions. I deserve that money more than his spoiled son." Detective Chen burst through the doors with Michael right behind her. "Emma, are you hurt?" Emma ran into Michael's arms, finally allowing herself to shake with the terror of what had just happened. "I'm okay, but your dad, she put something bad in his medicine, doctor." Martinez was already examining William Thompson, who had begun to stir slightly from all the commotion. The child's quick thinking may have saved his life. Whatever was in that syringe, very little of it made it into his system. Michael knelt down to Emma's level, tears in his eyes. "Emma, you risked your life for my father. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Emma said softly. "That's what families do for each other. And you're my friend now, so that makes us family." Detective Chen was already processing the scene, taking photos of the syringe and interviewing witnesses. "Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and about 6 other charges I'll think of on the way to the station." As they led Victoria away in handcuffs, she turned back to Emma with pure hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over, little girl. I have friends you've never dreamed of. People who don't like children who interfere with business." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. But she stood tall. "My daddy taught me that bad people always make threats when they're scared, and you look really scared to me." Dr. Martinez finished his examination of William Thompson and turned to the group. "He's going to be fine. No permanent damage. In fact," he paused, looking puzzled. "This is odd. His neurological responses are actually better than they've been since the stroke. It's almost as if..." "As if what?" Michael asked urgently. "As if someone had been deliberately keeping him sedated beyond what was medically necessary." Dr. Martinez frowned. "I'll need to review his medication charts from the past 3 weeks." Emma pulled out her notebook and flipped to a page near the back. "Doctor, would this help?" She handed him a piece of paper she'd found in the hospital trash can during one of her visits. "I found this when I was throwing away my juice box last week. It has Ms. Sterling's signature and something about maintaining cognitive suppression levels." Now, Dr. Martinez's eyes widened as he read the document. This is medical malpractice of the highest order. This woman has been deliberately keeping this man in a medically induced fog to prevent him from making coherent decisions about his finances." Michael sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed. "So she's been slowly killing my father for weeks, and I never knew." Emma climbed up onto the chair next to him. "But we stopped her, Mr. Thompson, and your daddy is going to get better now. Look, he's already starting to wake up." Indeed, William Thompson's eyes were beginning to flutter open, and for the first time in weeks, they seemed clear and focused. "Michael?" The old man's voice was weak but unmistakably lucid. "Son, is that you?" Michael grabbed his father's hand, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, Dad. I'm here. We're both here. This is Emma. She's the little girl who saved your life." William Thompson turned his gaze to Emma, and she saw the same kind green eyes that his son had inherited. "Hello, Emma. Thank you for taking care of my boy." Emma felt warm all over. "You're welcome, Mr. Thompson. Your son is very brave. He's been fighting to prove he didn't steal any money." William's face darkened. "Stealing? Michael would never." "Wait. You or she?" His eyes sharpened with returning awareness. "Victoria, she made me sign papers. I couldn't think clearly, but she kept insisting." Detective Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, we're going to need your help to make sure Victoria Sterling and her accomplices pay for what they've done. But first you need to rest and recover." As the medical team worked to flush William's system and adjust his medications, Emma noticed something that made her stomach drop. Through the window, she could see a black sedan parked across the street from the hospital, and even from the 10th floor, she could make out a figure watching the building through binoculars. Victoria Sterling's threats hadn't been empty after all. Emma was about to discover that saving Michael and his father was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous game. Emma tugged on Detective Chen's sleeve, her eyes fixed on the window. "Detective, there's someone watching us from across the street." Detective Chen followed Emma's gaze and immediately stiffened. "Michael, take Emma and your father to the secure wing, now." But before they could move, Emma's sharp eyes caught something else, something that made her blood freeze completely. "Detective Chen," she whispered, "look at the man by the elevator." A tall man in an expensive suit had just stepped off the elevator, and he was walking directly toward William Thompson's room with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. But Emma recognized him from the courthouse. He had been sitting in the back row during the trial, always taking notes. "That man was at the trial every day," Emma said urgently. "He's not supposed to be here." Detective Chen's hand moved to her weapon. "Security to the 10th floor, CICU now," she spoke into her radio. But the man had heard her and was already turning around, revealing a face that made Emma gasp. It was Judge Harrison, but not the kind, grandfatherly judge from the courtroom. This man's eyes were cold and calculating, and when he saw Emma pointing at him, his expression turned murderous. "Hello, Miss Johnson," Judge Harrison said, his voice now stripped of all warmth. "You've been quite the little detective, haven't you?" Emma instinctively stepped behind Michael, but her mind was racing. "You're not supposed to be here. Judges don't visit hospitals." "Very observant, child, but then again, you've always been too observant for your own good." Judge Harrison reached into his jacket and Detective Chen immediately drew her weapon. "Don't move!" Detective Chen commanded. Judge Harrison laughed but kept his hands visible. "Relax." "Detective, I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to make a business proposition." Michael stepped forward, still holding his father's hand. "What kind of business proposition?" "The kind that keeps little Emma here safe and sound," Judge Harrison replied smoothly. "You see, Victoria Sterling was just a small part of a much larger operation. We've been systematically acquiring valuable properties and assets from wealthy families across the city. The Thompson fortune was simply next on our list." Emma's notebook was clutched against her chest, and suddenly everything clicked into place. "The other cases, all those rich people who got in trouble in your courtroom, you did this to them too." "Such a bright child," Judge Harrison said with mock admiration. "Yes, Emma. The Henderson family lost their pharmaceutical company. The Rodriguez estate was liquidated after the patriarch was convicted of tax evasion. The Morrison shipping fortune, all of it, redistributed to more deserving parties." Detective Chen was already calling for backup, but Judge Harrison held up a hand. "Before you do anything rash, Detective, consider this. Emma Johnson is a very special little girl. Did you know her father, Robert Johnson, used to work for Thompson Industries?" Emma's eyes widened. She had never known exactly where her father worked. "Robert discovered some irregularities in Thompson Industries' books, irregularities that would have exposed our entire operation. We offered him a very generous sum to keep quiet, but he refused, said he had a daughter to think about, and he wanted to set a good example." Emma felt like the floor was falling away beneath her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, dear child, that your father's cancer wasn't entirely natural, and your mother's convenient disappearance 6 months later, well, let's just say she chose money over motherhood when we made her a better offer." The words hit Emma like physical blows. Michael's arm tightened around her protectively, but she could barely breathe. "You're lying," Emma whispered, but even as she said it, she remembered things that had never made sense. Her mother's sudden coldness toward her father during his illness, the mysterious phone calls, the way her mother had packed only her own belongings when she left Emma at the community center. "Your mother is currently living quite comfortably in Switzerland under a new identity," Judge Harrison continued cruelly. "She sends her regards." "Oh, wait. No, she doesn't. She specifically requested never to hear about you again." Emma felt tears burning her eyes, but through her pain, her analytical mind was still working. If this is all true, then why are you telling me? Why not just— She couldn't finish the sentence. Because you, my dear Emma, are now going to help us complete what we started. You see, your little heroics tonight have actually worked in our favor. With Victoria arrested, we need someone else to have legal access to the Thompson accounts. Someone young, sympathetic, someone the courts would trust. Detective Chen stepped forward. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see 3 more men in suits entering the room. Emma recognized one of them. It was Richard Davis, who was supposed to be in jail. Emma's world was spinning out of control, but one thing was becoming crystal clear. The conspiracy was much bigger than anyone had imagined, and she was right in the center of it. Judge Harrison smiled coldly. Now then, little Emma, let's discuss how you're going to help us finish what your father tried so hard to stop. After all, you wouldn't want anything to happen to your new friends, would you? As Emma looked around the room at Michael, his awakening father, and Detective Chen, she realized that saving them from Victoria Sterling had been the easy part. The real nightmare was just beginning. Emma stared at Judge Harrison and his 3 accomplices, her mind racing despite the crushing revelation about her parents. The little girl who had solved a conspiracy was now trapped in an even bigger one. But she wasn't the same frightened child who had first stood up in that courtroom. What exactly do you want me to do? Emma asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Judge Harrison smiled, but it was the cold smile of a predator. Smart girl, always thinking. Your father had the same quality. It's what made him so valuable, and ultimately so dangerous. Detective Chen shifted slightly, her hand still near her weapon. Whatever you're planning, Harrison, it won't work. My backup is already on the way. Richard Davis laughed from the doorway. Your backup? Detective, half the NYPD is on our payroll. How do you think I walked out of that holding cell so easily? Emma felt her heart sink, but then she remembered something her father had always told her. When everything seems hopeless, Emma, look for the smallest detail that others have missed. And there it was. Judge Harrison kept checking his expensive watch, not like someone waiting for backup, but like someone working against a deadline. You're in a hurry, Emma observed quietly. Something's going wrong with your plan. Judge Harrison's smile faltered slightly. Clever as always. Yes, Emma, your little courtroom performance today has accelerated our timeline considerably. We need to complete the Thompson acquisition and disappear before federal investigators arrive tomorrow morning. Michael spoke up from beside his father's bed. Federal investigators? Oh yes, Judge Harrison continued. It seems someone has been feeding information to the FBI about judicial corruption in this district. We have perhaps 8 hours before they raid my chambers and freeze all the accounts we've been using. Emma's mind was working furiously. Someone else knew about the conspiracy, someone with enough power to bring in federal agents. But who? The question now, Judge Harrison said, is whether you'll help us complete this final transaction voluntarily, or whether we'll need to provide you with additional motivation. No, one of the men by the door stepped forward and whispered something in Judge Harrison's ear. The judge's face darkened. It seems we have another complication. Detective Chen, it appears your partner has been asking uncomfortable questions about tonight's events. Mr. Davis, and please make a call and ensure Detective Rodriguez meets with an unfortunate accident on his way here. No, Emma shouted, then caught herself. She needed to be smarter. I mean, I'll help you, but I want to know exactly what you need me to do first. Judge Harrison studied her carefully. You'll testify tomorrow that Michael Thompson confessed to you about additional hidden accounts. You'll say he told you the location of offshore funds that we've already prepared. With your testimony, we can seize the remaining Thompson assets legally. Emma nodded slowly, but her sharp eyes had caught something crucial. Judge Harrison's expensive watch wasn't just any watch. It had an engraving on the side that she could just make out. To Frank, love always. Margaret. Frank. Victoria had mentioned Uncle Frank in one of her phone calls. Judge Harrison was the Uncle Frank that Victoria had been reporting to. "I need some time to think about exactly what I'm going to say," Emma said carefully, "and I want to make sure Mr. Thompson and his dad are going to be safe." "Of course," Judge Harrison said magnanimously. "You have until 6 a.m. tomorrow. The hearing is at 8 a.m. sharp." He gestured to his men. "Mr. Davis will stay here to ensure our new young witness remains motivated." As Judge Harrison and 2 of his men left, Emma felt the walls closing in, but she also felt something else, a spark of the same determination that had carried her through everything so far. Richard Davis settled into a chair by the door, clearly planning to watch them all night. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the power of an 8-year-old girl who had learned that sometimes the smallest person in the room could change everything. Emma caught Detective Chen's eye and made a tiny gesture toward her notebook. Detective Chen nodded almost imperceptibly. The real battle was about to begin, and this time, Emma wasn't fighting alone. The hours crawled by in William Thompson's hospital room. Richard Davis sat by the door, alternating between checking his phone and glaring at Emma, who appeared to be sleeping curled up in the chair next to Michael. Detective Chen dozed fitfully in another chair, her hand never far from her weapon. But Emma wasn't sleeping. Her mind was working through every detail she had observed, every conversation she had overheard, every clue she had gathered over the past 3 weeks. More importantly, she was remembering things about her father that she had never understood before. Robert Johnson had been more than just a paralegal. Emma now recalled the late-night phone calls he had made during his illness, speaking in hushed tones about patterns and irregularities. She remembered him teaching her how to recognize forged documents, how to spot lies in people's body language, how to memorize important details. He hadn't just been teaching her life skills, he had been preparing her for this moment. Around 3 a.m., when Richard Davis's vigilance was at its lowest, Emma carefully opened her notebook to a page she had marked earlier. Written in her father's handwriting she had practiced copying for years, was a phone number and a single word: insurance. Emma had found this page tucked inside one of her father's old legal books 2 years ago, but she had never understood what it meant. Now, looking at the number, she recognized the area code, Washington, D.C. While pretending to adjust her position in the chair, Emma managed to catch Detective Chen's attention. Using sign language that her father had taught her for emergencies, she spelled out FBI. Detective Chen's eyes widened slightly, but she gave no other indication that she had understood. Emma then pointed to her notebook and mouthed silently, "My dad knew." Over the next hour, Emma carefully communicated her plan to Detective Chen using a combination of sign language and barely perceptible gestures. It was risky, dangerous, and depended on split-second timing, but it was their only chance. At 4:15 a.m., William Thompson began to stir more actively as the last of Victoria's sedatives left his system. His movements woke Michael, who immediately went to his father's side. "Dad, how are you feeling?" William's eyes opened, and for the first time in weeks, they were completely clear and alert. "Michael," he said, his voice stronger than it had been since the stroke. "Son, I need to tell you something important about the company, about what Victoria made me sign." Richard Davis immediately stood up, his attention focused on the bed. This was exactly what Emma had been waiting for. Moving with the silent grace that only children seem to possess, Emma slipped out of her chair and crept toward the small bathroom attached to the hospital room. Davis was so focused on William Thompson's words that he didn't notice the 8-year-old girl disappearing behind him. Once in the bathroom, Emma pulled out her father's phone, the one the community center had let her keep as a memento. She had charged it secretly for 2 years, hoping against hope that someday her mother might call. With shaking fingers, she dialed the number from her father's note. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, emergency line," came a crisp voice. "My name is Emma Johnson," she whispered. "My father was Robert Johnson." He left me a note that said to call this number if Judge Harrison ever tried to hurt people. There was a pause, then the voice became urgently interested. Emma, stay on the line. Are you in immediate danger? Yes. I'm at Presbyterian Hospital, room 1047. Judge Harrison is stealing money from families, and he killed my daddy, and he's going to make me lie in court tomorrow, and— Emma, slow down. We know about your father. He was one of our informants. We've been building a case against Harrison's operation for 3 years. Emma felt her knees go weak. My daddy was helping the FBI. He was a hero, Emma. And if you're calling this number, it means you're in terrible danger. We have agents 3 minutes away from your location. Emma heard Richard Davis's voice getting louder outside the bathroom door. Where's the girl? They found me, Emma whispered into the phone. Emma, listen carefully. Get to the main elevator and press the emergency stop button. Our agents will reach you there. Can you do that? Emma nodded, even though the person on the phone couldn't see her. Yes. She hung up and carefully opened the bathroom door. Richard Davis was looking around frantically, and Detective Chen was on her feet, hand on her weapon. She can't have gone far, Davis was saying. The kid's probably hiding somewhere in this room. Emma took a deep breath, remembering her father's words. Sometimes, Emma, the bravest thing you can do is trust in the plan, even when you can't see how it will work out. She stepped out of the bathroom. I'm right here, Mr. Davis. Davis spun around, relief and anger warring on his face. Don't ever do that again, you little— His words were cut off by the sound of the elevator doors opening down the hall, followed by authoritative voices saying, FBI, nobody move. Emma smiled for the first time in hours. I think my daddy's friends are here. The final phase of Robert Johnson's plan was finally in motion. The hospital corridor erupted into controlled chaos as FBI agents in tactical gear spread out through the 10th floor. Emma heard Agent Rodriguez, Detective Chen's partner, who was very much alive and now revealed to be an undercover federal agent, coordinating the operation over the radio. Richard Davis went pale as he realized the trap had been sprung. This is impossible. The kid couldn't have— The kid has been working with federal agents longer than you've been stealing from families, Detective Chen said with satisfaction, finally dropping her exhausted pretense. Did you really think we'd let an 8-year-old face this alone? Emma felt overwhelming relief, but also confusion. Detective Chen, you knew about my daddy? Your father was a brave man, Emma. When he discovered the financial irregularities at Thompson Industries, he didn't just report them to local authorities. He went straight to the FBI. He's been feeding us information about Harrison's operation for months before he died. Agent Sarah Mitchell, a tall woman with kind eyes, entered the room and knelt down to Emma's level. Hi, Emma. I'm Agent Mitchell. Your dad talked about you all the time. He was so proud of how smart and brave you were. Emma felt tears welling up, but Judge Harrison said my daddy was killed because he wouldn't take money. No, Judge Harrison told you a lot of lies tonight, sweetheart. Your father died of cancer, just like you thought. But before he died, he made us promise to watch over you and to stop Harrison's operation. Agent Mitchell's voice softened. He knew that if something ever happened to him, Harrison might try to use you to get to the Thompson family. Michael looked stunned. So everything that happened in court today was Emma following her instincts and her father's training, combined with federal agents positioning themselves to catch Harrison in the act, Agent Mitchell explained. When Emma stood up in that courtroom, she triggered a plan that's been 3 years in the making. Richard Davis made a desperate lunge toward the window, but 2 agents were already there to restrain him. As they cuffed him, Emma noticed something fall from his pocket, a small recording device. He was recording everything, Emma observed. The whole time we've been talking, he was recording it. Now, Agent Mitchell picked up the device and smiled grimly, which means we now have Judge Harrison on tape, admitting to murder, bribery, and conspiracy. Davis probably thought he was protecting himself, but he just handed us the final piece of evidence we needed. William Thompson, now fully alert and sitting up in bed, spoke for the first time since the agents arrived. Agent Mitchell, I need you to know that Victoria Sterling forced me to sign documents while I was medicated. I had no idea what I was agreeing to. We know, Mr. Thompson, those documents will be declared invalid and all your assets will be restored. Agent Mitchell turned back to Emma. But there's something else you should know, Emma, about your mother. Emma's heart clenched. She had been dreading this moment. Judge Harrison lied about that too. Your mother didn't abandon you for money. She was threatened. Harrison's people told her that if she didn't disappear, they would hurt both you and her. She thought she was protecting you by staying away. Emma felt like the world was spinning. She didn't want to leave me. She calls our office every week to check on you. She's been living in a safe house in Oregon, not Switzerland. And Emma, Agent Mitchell smiled, she's on her way here right now. Oh, the emotions crashing over Emma were too much to process. Relief, joy, confusion, and exhaustion all battled for control. Michael reached over and squeezed her hand. Emma, you saved my family, he said softly. But more than that, you finished what your father started. You brought down an entire criminal operation. Emma looked around the room at Detective Chen, Agent Mitchell, Michael, and his recovering father. I couldn't have done it alone. That's the point, sweetheart, Agent Mitchell said. Your father taught you that justice isn't about being the strongest or the smartest person in the room. It's about good people working together to do what's right. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. Harrison's in custody. We got him trying to flee through the hospital parking garage. The entire operation is shut down. Emma felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. But as the adrenaline began to fade, she realized there was still one more thing she needed to know. Agent Mitchell, what happens now? Do I go back to the community center? Agent Mitchell exchanged a look with Michael and his father. Actually, Emma, the Thompson family has made a request that might interest you. Emma looked at Michael, who was smiling through tears. Emma, would you like to come live with us, my dad and I? We'd like you to be part of our family. For real, this time. For the first time in 3 weeks of drama and danger, Emma Johnson, the brave little girl who had taken on corruption and won, was completely speechless. 3 months later, Emma stood in the witness box of a different courtroom, this one filled with FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and some of the most important legal minds in the country. But she wasn't nervous anymore. She had learned that telling the truth, no matter how scared you were, was always the right choice. Miss Johnson, said Federal Prosecutor Williams, a kind woman who had spent weeks preparing Emma for this moment, can you tell the court about the first time you suspected something was wrong with Mr. Thompson's case? Emma looked out at the packed courtroom. In the front row sat Michael and William Thompson, now fully recovered and back to running his company. Beside them sat Detective Chen, Agent Mitchell, and most importantly, a woman with Emma's same dark curls and brown eyes, her mother, Sarah Johnson. The reunion 3 months ago had been everything Emma had hoped for and more. Her mother had held her for hours, explaining through tears how she had been forced to disappear to protect Emma, how she had watched from afar as Emma grew up brave and smart and kind. How proud she was of the little girl who had grown up to be a hero. I knew something was wrong, Emma said clearly into the microphone, because Mr. Thompson's lawyer wasn't acting like a real lawyer. Real lawyers fight for their clients. They object to unfair questions. They don't let prosecutors say mean things without speaking up. In the defendant's section, Judge Harrison sat in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and defeat. Beside him, Richard Davis looked small and defeated. Victoria Sterling, transported from her prison cell for the trial, stared at the floor. And what made you suspect that Judge Harrison was involved? Prosecutor Williams asked gently. Emma pulled out her notebook, now a key piece of evidence in the federal case. I started noticing patterns. Judge Harrison's cases all seemed to end the same way, with rich families losing their money. And he kept checking his watch during the trial, like he was worried about time running out. Very observant. And Emma, can you tell the court about the night at the hospital? Emma's voice grew stronger as she recounted the events. She had told this story dozens of times now to FBI agents, prosecutors, and psychologists, but it never got easier to remember how scared she had been. Judge Harrison told me that my daddy was murdered because he wouldn't take their money. But that wasn't true. Later, Agent Mitchell told me that my daddy died of cancer, just like I always knew. Judge Harrison was trying to scare me into helping them. The defense attorney for Harrison stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay." Federal Judge Patricia Wong, who had been brought in from another district to ensure fairness, looked down at Emma kindly. "The objection is noted, but given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the age of the witness, I'll allow the testimony." Emma continued her story, explaining how her father had trained her to notice details, how he had prepared her without her knowing it for the day when she might need to fight for justice. When she finished, the courtroom was completely silent. Even some of the FBI agents were wiping their eyes. "Thank you, Emma," Prosecutor Williams said softly. "Your Honor, the government rests." During the recess, Emma sat with her new family in the courthouse cafeteria. Michael had officially adopted her 2 weeks ago, making her Emma Thompson Johnson. She kept both names because, as she told the adoption judge, "I want to honor my real dad and my new dad." "How do you feel?" Sarah Johnson asked her daughter. "I know this has been hard." Emma considered the question seriously. "I feel sad about Daddy, but happy that he was helping catch bad people. I feel angry that Judge Harrison lied about you, but happy that we're together now. Mostly I feel—" She paused, searching for the right word. "I feel like Daddy would be proud." William Thompson, now using just a cane instead of a wheelchair, smiled at his adopted granddaughter. "Your father would be very proud, Emma. You finished something very important that he started. And the best part," Michael added, "is that because of your testimony, the FBI has identified 12 other families who were victimized by Harrison's operation. Their money is being returned to them." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Good. That's how justice works, not just punishing bad people, but helping good people too." Agent Mitchell approached their table with a serious expression. "Emma, I need to tell you something. Judge Harrison's attorney wants to make a deal. He's offering to reveal the locations of all the hidden money in exchange for a reduced sentence." Emma considered this carefully. "Will the families get their money back?" "All of it." "Then I think that's good," Emma said. "Justice isn't about revenge, it's about making things right." As they walked back into the courtroom for the afternoon session, Emma felt her father's presence more strongly than she had since his death. She was no longer the scared little girl who had hidden in courthouse galleries. She was Emma Thompson Johnson, daughter of a hero, sister to a kind man, granddaughter to a wise elder, and champion of justice in her own right. The real battle had been won months ago in a hospital room. This trial was just the victory celebration. 6 months after the trial, Emma stood in the newly renovated children's wing of Presbyterian Hospital, watching as dozens of kids played in the bright, cheerful space that bore a small plaque. The Robert Johnson Memorial Playroom, where courage begins with caring. The wing had been funded by the recovered assets from Harrison's criminal operation, and Emma had insisted that part of it be dedicated to her father's memory. It seemed fitting that in the same hospital where she had saved William Thompson's life, children would now play and heal in a space honoring the man who had taught her that justice was worth fighting for. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Michael asked, approaching with 2 cups of hot chocolate from the hospital cafe. Emma accepted the warm cup gratefully. "I was thinking about something Judge Wong said after the sentencing. She said that sometimes justice takes a long time, but it always comes if good people don't give up." The sentencing had been comprehensive and satisfying. Judge Harrison received 35 years in federal prison. Richard Davis got 15 years and would never practice law again. Victoria Sterling received 20 years, with the possibility of parole in 12. Most importantly, every family that had been victimized by their operation had their assets restored with interest. "Speaking of good people not giving up," Michael said with a smile, "I have some news. The FBI called this morning." Emma looked up with interest. "Good news or bad news?" "Definitely good. They've identified Harrison's operation as part of a larger national network. Your testimony and the evidence you gathered has helped them build cases in 6 other states. They estimate that over 200 families have been victimized by similar schemes. Emma felt a familiar stirring of her investigative instincts. Are they going to catch all of them? With your help, they might. Agent Mitchell wants to know if you'd be interested in reviewing some case files. Apparently, you have a unique talent for spotting patterns that adults miss. Emma considered this seriously. At 9 years old, she had celebrated her birthday last month with both her birth mother and her adoptive family. She was more experienced with criminal investigation than most police officers. But she was also finally getting to be a regular kid, going to school, making friends, playing soccer. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. There's no pressure, Emma. You've already done more than enough. They walked through the hospital corridors, past the room where Emma had first confronted Victoria Sterling, past the CICU where she had saved William Thompson's life. The hospital felt different now, not scary and dangerous, but peaceful and hopeful. In the main lobby, they met Sarah Johnson, who had moved back to New York and was working as a victim's advocate for white-collar crime survivors. The reunion with her mother hadn't been perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, years of separation to bridge, but they were building something new and strong together. How was school today? Sarah asked, hugging her daughter. Good. I got an A on my report about the judicial system, Emma replied proudly. Mrs. Henderson said it was very, what was the word? Insightful. William Thompson approached from the elevator, moving easily now with just a slight favoring of his left side. The stroke had left minimal permanent damage, and he credited Emma's quick thinking with saving not just his life, but his mind. Emma, my dear, I have something for you, he said, producing a small, wrapped package. Emma opened it carefully to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal, much nicer than her old notebook, with her initials embossed in gold, ETJ. For your next investigation, William said with a wink. Emma ran her fingers over the smooth leather. Thank you, Grandpa William. But I'm not sure there will be a next investigation. Maybe I just want to be a regular kid for a while. And that's perfectly fine, he assured her. But heroes don't stop being heroes just because they're not actively heroic. They're heroes because of who they are inside. As they left the hospital together, the Thompson-Johnson family, complete and whole, Emma reflected on everything that had happened since that day she had stood up in the courtroom and declared, I can defend him. She had learned that justice wasn't about being the smartest person in the room, or the strongest, or even the bravest. It was about caring enough to act when action was needed and being willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was scary. She had learned that families weren't just about blood relationships, but about people who chose to love and protect each other. Most importantly, she had learned that her father's legacy wasn't just the work he had done for the FBI, but the values he had instilled in her. Courage, compassion, and an unshakable belief that truth would always triumph over lies if good people refused to give up. Agent Mitchell had been right. The real battle had been won in that hospital room. Everything since then had just been making sure the victory stuck. Emma Thompson-Johnson, age 9, veteran crime fighter and newly minted regular kid, was ready for whatever came next. 1 year later, Emma stood once again in a courthouse, but this time she was there by choice, not necessity. The Manhattan Family Court was a very different place from the criminal courthouse where her adventure had begun. Smaller, warmer, focused on healing rather than punishment. Today was the day that her adoption by Michael would be finalized in a special ceremony, making official what had been true in their hearts for months. Emma had asked for the ceremony to be held exactly 1 year after Judge Harrison's sentencing, turning what had been a day of justice into a day of celebration. "Are you nervous?" asked Detective Chen, now Captain Chen, after her commendation for the Harrison case, as they waited in the hallway. Emma considered the question. A little. But it's a good nervous, like when you're about to get something you've always wanted. The courtroom was packed with friends and family. Sarah Johnson sat in the front row, beaming with pride. William Thompson was there with his new girlfriend, Dr. Martinez from the hospital. Their relationship a beautiful outcome of the chaos that had brought them together. Agent Mitchell and Agent Rodriguez sat together, still amazed at how a case they had worked for 3 years had been cracked by an 8-year-old girl with a notebook. Even some unexpected guests had come. Prosecutor Morrison from the original trial was there, having become a friend to the family. Mrs. Patterson from the community center had tears in her eyes as she watched the girl she had tried to protect find the family she deserved. Judge Patricia Wong, who had presided over the Harrison trial, had agreed to conduct the adoption ceremony. She smiled warmly as the Thompson-Johnson family approached the bench. "Emma," Judge Wong said gently, "do you understand what adoption means? It means that Michael becomes my legal dad, and I become his legal daughter, and we promise to take care of each other forever," Emma replied confidently. "And Michael, do you promise to love and care for Emma as your own daughter?" Michael looked down at Emma with tears in his eyes. "I promise, Your Honor. She already is my daughter in every way that matters." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I declare this adoption final. Emma Thompson-Johnson, you are now officially and legally the daughter of Michael Thompson." The courtroom erupted in applause, but Emma barely heard it. She was too busy hugging her new dad and feeling the warmth of being exactly where she belonged. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the courthouse lobby. Emma moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and feeling overwhelmed by how many people cared about her. But the most meaningful moment came when Agent Mitchell pulled her aside. "Emma, I have something to tell you. The FBI has officially closed the Harrison case, and I wanted you to know the final numbers." Emma listened intently as Agent Mitchell explained that the investigation had ultimately led to the arrest of 47 people in 12 states, the recovery of over $60 million in stolen assets, and the restoration of property and savings to more than 300 families. "And it all started," Agent Mitchell said, "with a little girl who noticed that a lawyer wasn't fighting hard enough for his client." Emma felt a deep sense of satisfaction, but also something else, a sense of completion. The work her father had started was truly finished. "Agent Mitchell, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think my daddy would be proud of how everything turned out?" Agent Mitchell knelt down to Emma's level, just as she had that first night in the hospital. "Emma, your father would be amazed. He spent months gathering evidence and building trust with our team. But you accomplished in 3 weeks what we couldn't do in 3 years. You brought justice, not just to the Thompson family, but to hundreds of families we didn't even know had been hurt." Emma nodded, feeling a deep peace settle over her. "Good, that's all I ever really wanted." As the reception wound down, the Thompson-Johnson family gathered for photos. Emma stood between Michael and her mother, with William beside them, surrounded by all the people who had helped them win the fight for justice and family. "So, what's next for us?" Michael asked, as they prepared to leave. Emma thought about the question seriously. "I think I'd like to finish being 9 years old, maybe learn to ride a bike, definitely get better at soccer, and maybe," she paused, "maybe when I'm older I could help other kids who need someone to stand up for them." "I think," said Sarah Johnson, "that sounds like a perfect plan." As they walked out of the courthouse into the bright New York sunshine, Emma Thompson-Johnson reflected on everything that had brought them to this moment. She had learned that heroes came in all sizes, that families could be built from love as much as blood, and that justice was not just about punishing wrongdoing, but about protecting the innocent and restoring what had been lost. Most importantly, she had learned that when someone you love teaches you to be brave, that bravery becomes part of who you are forever. The little girl, who had once stood up in a courtroom and declared, "I can defend him," was now surrounded by people who would defend her, just as she would always be ready to defend others who needed protection. Justice, Emma had discovered, wasn't just about winning one battle. It was about building a world where everyone belonged to someone, where truth mattered more than power, and where even the smallest voice could change everything. The real battle was never really over. But with good people fighting together, it was a battle that love would always win.